A couple people just joining right now. We've just been kind of shooting the breeze and catching up with some of the people we haven't chatted with in some time. I know you're a little tight on time, so I was just going to kind of do a quick intro and then let you talk about some of the things Raleigh City Council has been working on, accomplished, plans to accomplish, and then hopefully you have some time for a little bit of Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so actually quite a few of the people here listening do live in Raleigh city limits proper. And obviously Raleigh being the heart of Wake County, even those who live in surrounding communities care about what happens in Raleigh. If you don't know, Raleigh City Council has 8 members. It's a mayor, 2 at large, meaning they're elected citywide, and then 5 district members. So we have 8 people on Raleigh City Council, and those are off-year election cycle, meaning 2019, 2021. Jonathan was elected to his first term in 2019, along with a couple other first-time council members. And it was definitely a shift. Again, depending on how closely you follow Raleigh City Council, I know quite a few of you do. It was definitely a change from the previous council. So with that, I will, like I said, I wanted to keep it short. I will turn it over to Jonathan. And again, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Of course, thank you for having me. Brad had asked that I sort of just go over maybe some high level, some of the changes that we've made in the past year to some of our zoning laws and our code. And then I'm happy just to take questions. I usually do a bit better with question and answer and off the cuff than prepared remarks. But I did take some notes to share with y'all. So I'll just run through my list. I'll start by saying that coming in to our term, I think that there was a lot of synergy on issues about housing and transit and density. And then very quickly into our term, we were dealt some very big and some very serious issues that none of us campaigned on. Obviously, a lot happened in 2020 that no one could have predicted or expected, from the global pandemic to the social justice issues that spilled over literally into our streets. So that said, we went in, I think, with a punch list of things we were hoping to accomplish. And looking back on 2020, I feel proud because despite everything else we were dealt, we were able to accomplish nearly everything that at least I campaigned and promised. And there are a few outstanding issues that I hope will wrap up in the next couple of months, the first quarter of 21. So one thing that we did was we voted to allow cottage courts in more residential zoning districts. Functionally, they're allowed citywide if you look at our map of the city and how it's zoned. And we doubled the maximum number of dwelling units that can be in a cottage court. If you're not familiar with what a cottage court is, it's basically a collection of smaller homes. They typically face inward toward like a common green space or courtyard. They provide a lot more density and affordability, and they're kind of considered one of the missing middle housing. We approved the text change that removed the height cap measurement for buildings 7 stories and up. Of similar cities, Raleigh was the only one that was measuring buildings by both height and story. By removing the height requirement and only measuring by stories, it allows developers more flexibility and more creativity with how they're designing buildings. So hopefully we'll start to see maybe a little more inspired architecture downtown. Not to say that the buildings we have on the ground aren't pretty, just sometimes they were a little confined to, I guess, building parameters. And so maybe we'll see some more creativity. A big one is we allowed accessory dwelling units by right citywide. If you don't know what an accessory dwelling unit is, it's a self-contained separate dwelling unit located on the same lot as the principal dwelling unit. You usually see them located above garages or in basements, or they can be like detached little units themselves. The change allows the individual property owner to decide if an ADU is appropriate on their property and allows them to rent the ADU if they so choose. The old rules, you had to ask for an overlay district. So you basically had to go to all of your neighbors within a certain radius and ask if they will allow you to build an ADU. And then you had to petition for an overlay. And it was just a very lengthy process by which, when that process was approved, no one was actually building ADUs. So hopefully we'll see some of them built now that now that you can just build it by right in your own yard. We did a couple text changes to make it easier for small business owners. We heard a lot, I heard a lot during the last campaign about a lot of the red tape and how it's hard to open like just a mom and pop store in the city. We still have some work to do in that regard, but one thing that we moved on pretty quickly is that for when business owners are trying to like open or remodel an existing store or create a new store, they used to have to submit full site plans for all projects, regardless of the size and scope. And that was causing delays and causing increased costs and putting a bigger burden on entrepreneurs who are seeking to invest in our city. We've added now a 3-tiered system for site plans based on construction type and level of impact. And then inside that, it includes different categories for minor and major. So the approval for site plans should be moving a lot quicker now, take less time and cost less money. Something that was important to me was micromobility. So that would be the scooters. In oversimplified terms, it's really a lot more than scooters though. It's any sort of small personalized electronic mobility device. They had pretty much left Raleigh market, but we worked with the vendors in other cities to learn best practices, to collaborate on how we can eliminate barriers so the industry can be successful here. We approved new agreements that allow the providers to pay more flexible fees, including an annual fee and a per ride fee. We also worked out how to address fleet sizes and parking issues. And we focus on equity to make sure that the vehicles are fairly distributed throughout the city and that there's payment options for folks who may not have a smartphone. And so I think you'll be seeing some micromobility providers coming back to the market very soon. I think they can do it now, but I think they're waiting maybe until the weather improves a bit and perhaps when some more stuff starts opening. There are two, I think, pretty big things that we are still working on and that I hope will be wrapped up very quickly. At our next meeting on February 2nd, we will be voting on the short-term rental, Airbnb, vacation rental by owner text change. I am not a proponent of limitations on short-term rentals. I think if we start to see it becoming a problem in Raleigh, then we can legislate to address those problems. I am not in favor of putting restrictions and limitations on things for problems that don't yet exist. I don't think we should be legislating to create problems. So the version of the text change that's going to go up for public hearing and vote will allow short-term rentals, a whole house or a room in a house with no restrictions on the number of days throughout the year, or whether owner occupied or not owner occupied. None of that will be in the text change that's up for vote. We're going to check in on it and I think 6-month increments, 8, 12 months, something like that. And if we start to see issues with, out-of-town developers buying up housing stock and using them solely for short-term rentals, then we may need to come back and make some adjustments. But the version that I hope we will pass will be allowing the market to succeed in Raleigh and then addressing problems if and when they occur. So that will be on our calendar February 2nd, and that was a big thing that a lot of us campaigned on. And then the last piece, at our very first meeting in 2019, actually, because we took office right before the new year, we asked staff to authorize text changes to make it easier to build townhouses and duplexes in more residential zoning districts, I think from R2 up. So, and they were working on that through most of 2020. It ended up being a bit more of a technical change than they thought. They came back to council for some more clarification on how to accomplish the goals, and they should be coming back for a final vote. But ideally, you should be able to build townhomes or plexes, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes in places where you would normally be able to build single family homes, more of those places moving forward. And that's another big missing middle piece. And I hope we'll have that wrapped up in the next couple of months as well. So those are all the notes I wrote down, and I'm happy to take questions now.
All right. Well, thank you. You're doing a great job, and just continue. I guess I don't see a. Please use the hand raise feature in Zoom, and we'll kind of rotate through. It's easier than 15 people all speaking. And Amy has a question, but okay, so we'll just go with Amy, who uses chat instead of the raise hand feature. Go ahead, Amy.
Sorry, don't see the hand raise feature for whatever reason. So Jonathan, you mentioned, making things easier on small businesses. Obviously, 2020 has been very difficult for a lot of businesses in Raleigh. Like a lot of businesses have had to close, which, is awful. And I'm just curious, are there any plans to make things easier for make things even easier for small businesses? Like, for example, like maybe just eliminating some licensing fees or just, stuff like that. Because, I just feel like we're gonna have to do a lot to revitalize downtown after it's been decimated by the pandemic.
Yeah, so we have a really great economic development team, and they work really closely with our community partners like the Downtown Raleigh Alliance. There's like the Midtown Raleigh Alliance, Hillsborough Street Municipal Service District or Alliance. And so basically, whatever they bring to us as a problem and a creative solution, we've been taking. And so I think we're having a lot of conversations with the business owners, with Bill King with Downtown Raleigh Alliance about what small business owners need, and then we basically ask staff to come back with how we can accomplish it. And it has been sort of like drinking from the water hose, they say, or trying to play catch up. But so far, things we've done is we pretty quickly stood up a small business grant program. I think we were the only municipality in the state to do grants, not loans. Obviously, we've allowed restaurants to expand into streets and sidewalks. We've basically said whatever you need, we'll figure a way to set it up. The flexibility for how to expand your seating and dining, we didn't do. I've seen some smaller cities just do like the standard where block off the area. People were asking why Raleigh didn't do that. It was because the business owners wanted flexibility, and some of the downtown business owners were still only doing takeout. So they were saying, please don't close the roads because we need people to come get to our establishments. And other folks were saying, give us space to expand our tables. So we had to get creative with that. The buses are running fare free. We quickly put together a free parking program for service workers and anybody else who's working downtown in the small businesses. And so I agree, there's going to be a lot more that we have to do. I want to do everything we can to save as many of the small businesses as we can. And there's not an idea that has been brought to us that we've said no. And so I think that work's going to continue.
Awesome. Good to hear.
So I'm going to give Travis points for finding the raised hand feature, and then we'll go to Brad. So Travis, you have a question you'd like to ask? Travis, unmute. Or I'll unmute you. Hold on.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you for joining us, Jonathan. We really appreciate it. I just had a question about, I don't know what the changes have been, but drinking alcohol certain amount of feet from the place of business on a sidewalk. Like, is that law ever going to change where you can actually go more than 6 feet away from the business and hold a beer safely near the street and drink it without it being illegal?
Yeah, I don't know about a permanent change. I know that with expanding if you've been downtown, a lot of the restaurants, some of the bars, they're in the sidewalks now, they're in the road. They've done like the little pedlets or that kind of stuff. And we had to coordinate that with the state, with the ALE. The city had to coordinate that. The state controls the alcohol laws in a lot of ways. And so, they've finally allowed to go liquor sales. So I don't know. I keep thinking about everything we've learned from the pandemic, better use of our public spaces and some best practices. And there's so much that I hope continues. I go to like Pelagic Beer on Person Street sometimes, and they have this like little pedlet out in the street now. I'm like, this doesn't need to be on street parking in the future. This should be tables so we can sit out here and enjoy the nice weather. We have nice weather almost year round. So some of that, there's a really nice one in front of Bittersweet. They really took advantage of the Upfront grant program, I think. And so I hope that kind of stuff stays. And if that stuff stays, then I think the natural derivative would hopefully be looking at loosening some of these, liquor laws to complement it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And our next question will be coming from Brad.
Greetings. So I have just a general question to give you an opportunity to weigh in on downtown South, just to kind of update us on what's going on there, and in particular to address the two most prominent concerns that folks have been voicing about in the environmental issues as well as gentrification.
You just want me to speak on my thoughts on downtown South in general and focus on the environmental and the gentrification issue?
Yeah, if you can just give us kind of an update on where that's at with, in particular, those two issues.
Yeah, it would be hard, I think, for me to succinctly explain my position just on this call, but I'll try. I put out summaries after every meeting, and I did a whole one on downtown South where I sort of went through my thought process on it, how I approached. Sorry, my dogs are going crazy. Okay, so the rezoning was in front of council at the end of 2020. That was just the entitlement for the land. Most of it was previously zoned industrial. It got rezoned to, commercial mixed use, residential mixed use, I think, at different height levels. So that was really just the first part of it. There's going to be a lot more that's coming up with downtown South in the next year or so. One part would be the public-private partnership that they've requested. There's going to be a lot of, I think, public engagement on that piece. But we did the rezoning piece. One part of it I know was an issue with downstream flooding. Some of the environmental concerns. I know that the developer worked fairly closely with some of the environmental partners to get some conditions regarding that. They've included, and I'm gonna forget the specifics, but I wrote about it so I can pull it up. They've included money basically to improve that entire corridor, even not on their property. And so even folks who I talked to before the rezoning, who opposed the rezoning for other issues, the environmental piece seemed to satisfy them as well. So I sort of going into it and put a push pin in that and said, okay, well, I think they've satisfied that part of it. The affordable housing gentrification issue, that was kind of I think one of my biggest concerns going into the rezoning. How are we going to focus on workforce development, women and minority-owned business participation, and the housing issue? Most of the land now is undeveloped industrial land, but obviously it's the areas around it that are of the concern. So of the actual land that's being developed, there's, I think, very few residential units. I talked to a lot of people for and against the project before. I went into it with an open mind. I thought what was compelling was a lot of the folks who live directly adjacent to it really wanted the project. They wanted the amenities. They wanted to be able to walk to a grocery store or a pharmacy or a park. And they liked that it was one developer doing the project and not, I think they knew that the land was eventually going to be sold and developed, and are they going to deal with 10 different people or one person? And then the folks that the developer has pulled in for the community's type benefits, the WMBE participation and the housing. I mean, if you go back and watch that meeting, I'll be honest, I'm not sure how anyone could have voted against it after what we heard. It was impressive to hear folks like Lavelle Moten talk about his commitment to the community and how he's been asked if he's on the right side of the project. He says he knows he's on the right side because he's on the inside. I mean, you've got to trust that a guy like Coach Moten is going to do what's right for his community. And that was really persuasive for me. The two council members who happen to be the only African-American council members on the council, one of them represents the district. She made the motion to approve. The other council member represents the adjacent district where a lot of the concerns about gentrification displacement were occurring. He seconded it. And, I trust their judgment. I think there's more work to do, but after sitting through the public hearing and hearing all the folks who signed up to speak and support and sort of their impassioned pleas in favor of the project, and it was a diverse group of them. And then the folks that they've pulled in to partner on the WMBE and the housing and community benefits, it was impactful, more impactful than reading about it in a newspaper. I'll certainly say that. And I wrote about it on my website. So if you go to jonathanmelton.com, you can pull up my comments on downtown South. And I lay out my thought process and my reasons for voting yes much better than I'm sure I just did in the past 5 minutes.
Thank you. Let me see who has a hand up. Mary Ruth has a hand up. Mary Ruth, you're unmute yourself, please, and go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm curious about what the city is thinking about. I live in an older neighborhood near Cameron Village, and a lot of the little houses that are being torn down and rebuilt require that these massive trees be taken out. And I'm wondering what the city is doing to remain the city of oaks and not become the city of stumps. I mean, are we looking at replanting something that's as oak and not crepe myrtles, or what's going on in that field? Because the deforestation of Raleigh is happening in front of us.
Yeah, so I think that's a concern I've heard a lot. And if I say something that's wrong, I'll certainly correct myself later. But it's my understanding that we don't have the legal authority to mandate like tree conservation issues on an individual owned property lot. Now we're doing some work on protecting the floodplains. We're doing some work, I think, in general on if you're going to knock a house down, then, you know, instead of building a much bigger single home, like why not build a duplex there or a quadplex there or something where if you're going to take up more space, at least you can house more people. So we're sort of attacking it from different angles. One piece that I think kind of gets lost in the rezoning discussion is when someone comes to us and asks for an increase in entitlement, that's where we get a lot of flexibility. So if you're coming to us and you want to upzone the property, then we have a lot more flexibility on conditional zoning and can talk about things like tree buffers or conservation. But if you're building on your lot by right, the city's not really able to do anything about it. But we can make it easier for you to build something that's denser, which is better for the environment and houses more people and will take up less land. And that's sort of where we've been focusing.
Okay, so, and I agree with most of what you said, but I was thinking that the city could take a more proactive role in replanting large oak trees or larger trees on land they themselves own, whether it's in right of ways or in boulevards or parkland or what have you.
I'm not sure. I'm assuming we have a program that does that. I put my email in the chat box. If you want to follow up with me with that question, or I may just remember it myself, I can get my policy analyst to see what programs we have. I am certain we have programs for planting trees. I just don't know what that looks like.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. I don't see a hand raised or anything in chat, so I will take one of my turns. First, I hope you're running again in 2021. And like I said, since you're not in a district, this may not be as applicable to you, but it's my understanding with the census coming in a little late, and then, you know, the NCGA not being always as efficient as we might like, there may be some challenges if you guys are filing to run in July, knowing where the new districts are, at least for the 5 council members who are in districts. It's my understanding those will shift based on, you know, who lives where now. Has there been any discussion, or you know, either privately amongst yourselves or as staff come back and said, hey, this is what would change if we have to change, like we would just file in August and then have the election in November? Can you speak to that, please?
I've seen discussion on the internet, like Twitter, but no one's talked to me about it in an official capacity. As far as I know, the election is in the fall. At our last council meeting, the Board of Election asked us to set the filing fees or confirm the filing fees for the election in October, and we did that. So as far as I know, the machine's churning forward with an election in October of 21. But I'm aware of the issue with the census. No one's talked to me about it. So I may find out, the legislature may tell us something at the same time as everyone else. But no, I haven't heard anything about it other than what I saw on Twitter. But we did, we set the filing fee last week. So as far as I know, October 21. Okay.
So before we go to Brad, I'm going to make sure everybody at least gets one question in. Mike, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, and thank you for joining, and go ahead and ask your question, Mike.
Great, thank you for inviting me. Jonathan, I was wondering, with the bus rapid transit routes going down, in particular New Bern, about a third of that space is actually protected from density because it's neighborhood conservation overlay districts. And I'm just wondering if the city can do anything to help maybe make that vision possible, in spite of having those overlay districts there.
Yeah, so we're mapping transit overlay districts, TODs, and that's actually an interesting question because I'm not sure which one takes priority. I'm going to say the TOD will lay on top of the neighborhood conservation overlay district and take priority. But we're doing the stationary planning now. That we're going to map the transit overlay district, so that will regulate what can and cannot be built there, and it is intended to entice or incentivize mixed use, dense, walkable development. And that will be going all up and down New Bern. We had, like, at one of our recent council meetings, we had, I think, the proposed mapping of the New Bern corridor, and it goes, several blocks back on either side of New Bern, to prevent things like gas stations and drive-throughs, because we would want, mixed use, dense, walkable housing and services. So yes, there's going to be a transit overlay district that will be mapped along BRT and other transit routes. And another thing that we did that I forgot to mention is we eliminated parking minimums downtown and parking minimums in transit overlay districts. So sometimes what drives up the cost of housing is having to shoehorn in all the required parking, and that won't be a requirement moving forward in those areas.
Terrific, thank you so much.
Thank you. So next in the queue, we have Brad, and then it will be Amy. Brad, you had a follow-up question? Mute button.
Yeah, I had a follow-up to the question that you asked, and just as an aside, I'd like to comment. I think most of the people on this call are probably aware of the contrast between the makeup of the city council prior to 2019 and now. And I'll go out on a limb and say that libertarians in general who are following it are probably a lot happier with this crop than we were with the prior folks. That essentially the way that you guys have approached private property rights and a lot of the other issues in terms of enabling more freedom to us citizens of Raleigh, and you did a nice job of outlining several of those particular instances when you talked in the beginning. So my question is, now very interested in 2021, and of course you can't speak for anyone other than for yourself, but just if you have some kind of informal sense of how many of the current incumbents are planning to run again, if you could comment on that.
I haven't heard any of them say that they're not running, but I will be very frank. How do I put this in a way that I don't dislike campaigning? I like campaigning, but it's obviously not my favorite thing. And so, like, I don't want to think about campaigning just yet. Like, I want to continue to focus on governing. There are those two big things I really want to get done the next couple months. Like, I want to continue to keep my head down and work before I shift focus to raising money and a door knocking strategy. And so I haven't, I'm going to announce in a couple months. I think it's too soon to talk about it. And so, because that's my mind frame right now of I'm not going to focus on the election, I haven't really talked to many other people about it. The News and Observer asked me if I was running. I told them I was not ready to announce, but no one has told me they're not running, but no one has, I think the mayor said she is. That was in the news. But other than that, I have had very little conversations about it. It just feels too soon.
Well, thank you. Well, Brad, as he just clearly stated, he is not ready yet for your maximum donation for this cycle, but he will reach out to you when he is. Amy,
I'm just not ready. I want to keep working for a little bit before I have to shift gears.
Just teasing. Amy, you're next, and then Jennifer.
I appreciate you saying that you're ready to work and you're not not ready to campaign yet. That's awesome because we need to take a breath and you need to like actually do stuff before you can campaign. So I want to bring up a different topic. And I mean, while I've mostly been happy with the council, I have to say I haven't necessarily been happy with this particular topic, and that is policing. And I'm wondering if you could speak to any changes in policing, due to recent events. And I'm particularly interested in any new de-escalation training.
Yeah, so this is probably one where I feel a little frustrated too. I think I said going into this term we had a lot of synergy on issues. One thing that I don't think there was a lot of focus on in the last election was policing issues, and then suddenly there was a lot of focus on it. And so there was this learning curve of what is everyone's pressure point, what is everyone's tolerance level. I actually was talking about some police issues in 2019. So I came in ready to make some changes, like thinking that we need more oversight and figuring how we can shift how we care for the community, taking some work off of the police department's plate and putting in other places that may be more appropriate. I was ready to go on all that. And I sometimes maybe was a little bit of an outspoken outlier on issues, but I think it is good to have balance. We did the police advisory board, first council to put one of those in place. It doesn't have a lot of teeth because we're limited by state law. I got council to send a letter to the legislature, to the governor, to the chief justice, and add this to our legislative priority agenda. I think the council, I say the council, it wasn't us, because we also don't have any authority over RPD. We hire the city manager, the city attorney, the city clerk, and then the city manager hires the police chief. But at our, I think, strong suggestion, the police department quickly moved to implement a couple of those 8 can't wait policies that they had not been doing. And I know required de-escalation is one of the policies that they have. There's going to be a new police chief this year. The current chief has decided to retire. We have a new city manager who will hire the new police chief. And I will tell you that there is not anyone, I think, better to be making that decision than Marshall Adams David. She has been, simply put, a godsend to me in my first term. I had put out a couple of statements during the social justice issues that I was working with staff on issues. Staff was her. She was the assistant city manager that was, over public safety. And I can't tell you how many late night phone calls I had with her, talking creatively through issues. I don't think anyone better to make that hire. And so, I think you're going to see conversations in that direction. And I don't want to make it. I also think that there is a role for police in our community too, and we need to make sure that our police are cared for and have what they need. But I also think that there's some work that's on their plate now that should be going in other places. And so I hope that that's the direction the city will move. But I will tell you, it was an awful summer.
Okay,
Thanks for answering the question. I appreciate it.
thank you. And the next one, and I apologize, I can't remember if you go by Jennifer or Jen, but you're up on deck.
Either one.
Okay.
Depends on if it's my mom or not. But I just wanted to say thanks for inviting me, David. And my question is, I was really excited to hear you, Councilor Melton, and we talked about this many months ago, bring forward the corner stores and neighborhood kind of store initiative recently. I'm wondering if you have an update on that. And I'm wondering if you see it at all related to a larger conversation about like home accessory commercial uses, like the barbershop in your own garage. I know that would be a much bigger step forward, but I think that's where some of us would like to go. So I was just curious if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I chaired the Economic Development Innovation Committee. Yesterday at our committee meeting, we had this issue in committee. And so we authorized staff to bring back options for moving forward with ACU's accessory commercial units, which would be a certain proportion of a residential unit being able to use for commercial purposes. And then also allowing like corner stores, neighborhood markets in residential zoning. Right now, they're not allowed in any residential zoning. We had suggested they look at like R4 and up, maybe R6 and up. The research says you have to live within a quarter mile of the corner store for it to be viable. So the population density also needs to be at a certain point. And so if you look at like an R4 zoning, which is 4 residential units on an acre, it doesn't quite hit the population density for that quarter mile, but we can maybe try. But certainly R6, R8, R10, allowing corner stores in there. There are some public safety concerns because some of the corner stores that exist in certain neighborhoods now across the city, you know, folks say, I don't feel safe going to them. But I said at the committee yesterday that this needs to be a yes and. I think we can address the code enforcement and the public safety and crime issues with certain corner stores while also looking to build that 15-minute city, meaning anybody is within 15 minutes of something that they need. You don't need a car. You can walk to get produce. You can walk to get milk, you know. And so I want to build that city. And this is a big piece of it, putting goods and services closer to people where they are, addressing, you know, the food desert issues. And so we have tasked staff with coming back with options for allowing these commercial accessory ACUs, and then also looking at putting these like corner stores in residential zoning, probably R4 up. So it's that's I think a big this year project, and if I'm still around in 22, a 22 project, but it needs to get done. It's something I care a lot about.
Okay, well, thank
But
you.
I would go back and watch that meeting too. It was it's on our YouTube channel.
Okay, I'm going to hit you with one more and then probably let you go. Going back to downtown South and, you know, kind of echoing Amy and Brad, there's a lot to be happy about as far as property rights, letting people, townhomes, cottage courts. From our general perspective, that's all people who own property, exercising their rights to innovate, just like you just talked about entrepreneurs being able to do more. So I think that's why, at least within this group, there's a lot of happiness with this new council. However, if things don't make economic sense, then they shouldn't happen. And talking to a few of the people in the group, the funding for the partnership, you stated it was a partnership, but downtown South and funding for a stadium is a concern. If it makes sense, then the market does it on its own, is kind of the philosophy, right? If it was a financially viable project, then the market would do it. Otherwise, people just build to scale. People just develop the way they should. So can you give me some idea how I don't have, to be honest, I don't have a good sense that this council is where I would like them to be with the TIG and where some people in this group would be. So can you talk about the TIG a little bit, explain it, and why you're still probably open-minded about it?
Yeah, well, so with the Downtown South project, the stadium piece of it, you know, I campaigned in favor of that. I was in support of it since it was announced 2019. At the time, they were talking about the interlocal funding tax money, which is money that already funds other stadiums. I mean, that goes to PNC Arena. It goes to some of our other, you know, multi-use facilities. And that's like the heads and beds tax, right? So if you rent a hotel room, if you eat at a restaurant, a portion of that goes into a pot of money, and it can only be used for tourism generating facilities. And I thought that would be a great use of that money for a stadium that we can use to bring in more tax revenue and fund more things in the city. That discussion has now shifted focus from, I think, the interlocal funds, at least I think it has, that they haven't brought forward that proposal anymore, but to a TIG, which is a tax increment grant. I didn't know really anything about TIGs until they came and asked. But because I chair the Economic Development Innovation Committee, I felt like a lot of this work's probably going to fall into my committee, so I should get a jump start on doing my homework. So I went and read the Charlotte TIG policy. I did some research on other similar situated cities, and we found out that Raleigh doesn't even have a TIG policy, period. So whether we offer a TIG to the developer for Downtown South or not, I felt like it was important for the city to at least have a policy. Charlotte has done 15 TIG projects. The county has a TIG policy, from what I understand. So we directed staff to at least put together a policy that the city could have. Then it's going to go into, do we offer the tax increment grant for this project? And that's, I think, where there's still a big question mark. What I kind of like about the TIG as a tool is it's not like a TIF where you have to do basically like you float debt for a district, and then the developer pays it back. With a TIG, the city doesn't take on any debt or liability associated with anything related to the project. What happens is we would come into an agreement on, here are a list of things that we think will provide a measurable benefit to the community. Maybe it's a stadium, maybe it's housing, maybe it's street and sidewalk infrastructure, maybe it's a big park, whatever it is. And we say, if you build this and you actually deliver it and there's an actual measurable benefit, then you can get a refund on the difference in the property taxes. Basically, like, the land is X dollars now. If you improve it, it's Y dollars, and you'll get a rebate on the difference. So from a risk standpoint, it's really nice because the city doesn't take on any debt. We're not liable for anything. We don't obligate ourselves for anything. We say, we think these are great projects, community benefits, and if you actually build them and there's an actual benefit, then you'll get some of your tax rebate. So it's not like this pool of money that's sitting somewhere that we're going to give to someone. It's basically like money that the property generates on its own, and you get a cut of it back. The developer does. And one of the economic development director in Charlotte, I think, said, we do these projects a lot because it's low risk to the city, potential high reward. And if they don't build the benefit, then they don't get any tax money back. But we hope they build it, because then we get our park or our affordable housing or maybe our stadium. So that piece of it is intriguing to me. And so, I like to come from a place of yes on things, but I also want them to make financial sense. And being a good steward of public funds is one of the peak, requirements of serving in public office. So I think we're a bit ways off before any vote or discussion happens on that. I think there's going to be a lot more public discussion and a lot more research done with staff and committee meetings before we get there. But I'm certainly not no on it. And I think that if Charlotte can find a way to make 15 of these projects work to their benefit, surely Raleigh can participate as well if it makes sense.
Fair enough. Do you have time and patience for one final question from Brad?
Yes.
Go for it, Brad. You had the question. Brad, mute. You're going to ask about the
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, one thing that I found intriguing, I know that there's a committee that's looking at the possibility. I mean, you talked about the undue pressure of political campaigns, or well, you didn't actually state that, but that's the implication, and I tend to agree. I mean, 2 years is not a very long time. I know there's a committee that's looking at instituting potentially 4-year terms for city council, and also maybe staggering them so that there's some continuity built into the system. Can you update us on where that's at?
Yeah, so I don't know what discussions they're having. We put together a task force, and they're working with staff in the city attorney's office. We really gave them just open-ended. And what they were tasked with was, figuring out how much council members should make, what should the terms be, should there be term limits, when should the elections occur, should there be staggered terms? And I don't know how to, I don't want to say this in a way that comes across wrong, but I'll just be very frank. Before this council came in, I think the makeup of prior councils was a lot of just like, older white people. And I don't have anything against old white people. I hope to be an old white person myself one day. My dad's an old white man, love him very much, but that doesn't need to be everyone who's running the city. And it's hard with a part-time council with part-time pay to also then be on council. So if we want more like demographic representation, we need to be looking at how we can open that door of possibility. So we have a part-time mayor right now. Our council and mayor, should they be full-time? What should they make? How long should the terms be? We get a lot of criticism with so few people vote in city elections. Well, let's try to fix that too. So they're tasked with looking at how to increase the voter turnout, how to make sure, we can leave the door of opportunity open behind us. A lot of us are younger and still working. We've got, Nicole Stewart's a mom, and, I'm a lawyer and I'm on council. We're not all independently wealthy. We're not retired. And so how do we open the door for more opportunity? And that's what this task force is looking at. And I hope that they will come back with some recommendations that we can implement. And, the size of the council, the terms, term limits, pay, when the election should happen. They have an open-ended ability to come back with recommendations with the help of the city attorney. And I look forward to it because changes need to be made. I think it's very, very difficult to run for council right now, and you have to do it every 2 years. And I don't see how a small business owner or how people that look like the people who are in our city every day, how more of them can run to be on council if the current situation stays the way it is.
All right. Well, thank you. Jonathan, thank you for joining our group this evening and answering these questions. I see 3 or 4 people here who I know will be fairly active in 2021 in supporting some of the candidates that we hope to put back on council or return to council. So again, I appreciate all the work you've done on council and council at large. So you've done a great job for us. Thank you. If you have any closing comments, feel free to share, but we really appreciate everything you've done.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I put my email in the chat box. I'll put my website in here too, not because I'm like shamelessly self-promoting, but because I post summaries of meetings on there. So if you want to read about what council is doing, obviously it's in my own words, but I try to be very flat with it. So that's in there. And if you have follow-up questions, happy to answer them. And yeah, just happy to connect. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you. We're going to shut down the meeting, Brad, then?